Storytelling Festival is held in Jonesboro, Tennessee, the first full weekend in October every year. And this year I get to be a ghost storyteller. I never got to do that before. Told at the festival many times, but never as a ghost teller. And this is one of the stories I'm going to tell. So you get to a preview of what would be happening at the festival. In the old days, if you ever went to Scotland, at any place where you came to the crossing of two roads, you'd find a triangular patch of ground where no grass would grow at all. And that's because the young people would claim that spot for themselves. And every night you'd find them all there together dancing. Over the years, dozens and dozens of flying young feet would pound the ground as hard and smooth as a dance floor. No lord or lady in a castle ever had a better place to dance than one of those little triangular shaped patches at the crossroad. And so it was one late summer night. All the young people in the area began to gather into one of those little dancing places. They came by ones, they came by twos, you know how young people do, till everybody in the area had gathered in, except for one young woman. She came creeping down the hedge that lined the road, and when she reached the end of the hedge, she sat down beneath it and watched the dancers in their fun, and she began to weep. She was crying for her sweetheart. In the spring, he had gone to a village on the coast and gotten a job on a fishing boat. Later, word had come to his parents, and then from them to her, that in a bad storm that boy had been washed overboard and he was drowned. And ever since that time, it seemed like she couldn't think about anything else. Nothing anybody said to her gave her any kind of comfort. She wanted more than anything in the whole world to go to the place where the boy had been buried. She just wanted to be as close to him as she could be in this life again. It was a long way to the coast. She had no way to get there. And so instead, she came to the place where the two of them had spent the most time together, where they'd spent the most time in one another's company. And watching the other dancers and their fun made the loss of him seem new and sharp. And so she wept some more. As the evening wore on, down the road came a rider. He dismounted and joined the dancers, and soon everybody was glad he had come. He knew the old songs well. Nobody laughed so loud. Nobody swung the girls up so high when they danced. But after a while, the dance began to end. And the young people started home by ones, much more now by twos, until finally there was nobody left in that little dancing space, except the stranger and the girl who was still weeping underneath the hedge. He came and he stood right over her. He said, "You're a pretty girl, or you would be if your face wasn't all red and swollen from so much weeping." She said, "I'm crying for my sweetheart." He said, "How did that happen?" He said, "He went to the coast and got a job on a fishing boat. In a bad storm, they say he was swept overboard and drowned." He said, "Fishing boat? The fleet only goes out in the very first days of spring, girl. It's almost autumn now. It's good to weep for the dead when they are newly gone, but after a while you ought to dry your eyes and learn to live again. Come and dance with me." "I'll not dance with you," she said. "Why would I dance with you? The only one I ever wanted to dance with is already in his grave." But he reached down and grabbed her around the wrist and jerked her up to her feet. And he dragged her behind him down into the middle of that little triangular patch of ground. And there, he held her so tight and he swung her so fast, her feet began to move like they had a life of their own. And after a while, breathless from the dance, for the first time she looked up into his face, and she realized she was looking into the warm and well-remembered eyes of her sweetheart. "Jamie," she said, "they told me you were dead." "Is that what they told you? Well, I'm back to dance with you tonight, girl, so come and dance with me." She said, now that I have you with me again, I'll never let you out of my sight. I'm never going to let you leave me. He said, no, that can't be. I have to be gone from this place before the very first light of dawn shows in the sky in the morning. Then I'll go with you, she said. No, girl, he said. You wouldn't like it where I live now. It's a small place and very dark. There's barely room enough for one. Well, I'll work, she said. I'll work, and by the strength of my hands, soon we'll have enough money to get a bigger and better place. Is that the way you have to have it, he asked her. Yes, she said, 'cause I won't let you leave me. And so he mounted his horse. He put out his hand, and he pulled her up behind him, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, and they rode off through the dark. She didn't know how far. As they rode along, the wind began to whip her hair back from her face, and she began to feel so cold, and so she wrapped her arms more closely around him to try to get warm. And she realized his clothing was wet. Not damp as your clothing might be if you had been dancing. This was wet. Wet with a cold that seemed to creep right into her bones. Are we nearly there, she said. But he never turned back. He never spoke to her again. He just kept on riding through the dark. After a while, they came to a little church. It had a graveyard stretching around it in every direction. He slowed the horse to a walk, and he paced the horse through the gateway and then turned its head so that he could pace it down one of the rows of tombstones until he reached one grave, and there he pulled the horse up sharp, and he dismounted. This is where I live now, he said. She looked down. She was no longer looking into the warm and well-remembered eyes of her sweetheart. Now she was staring into the eyes of a lifeless corpse. Isn't it any wonder my clothes are wet, he said, when every tear you ever shed for me has run to this grave and stood in it with me? Isn't it any wonder I could have no rest when your wailing and your weeping is always ringing in my ears? And now I have you with me once again, and I will hold you in my arms safe and still and quiet, and at last I'll finally sleep. And he began dragging her from off the horse. But she managed to throw herself off the horse on the other side and start running. She was dodging back and forth among the tombstones. But he was after her. His hands were clutching at her clothing, until at last the very tips of his fingers fastened on the end of her tartan shawl. She struggled to get free, and when she couldn't, she threw the shawl from off her shoulders and just kept running, turning and twisting around tree trunk and tombstone, through light and shadow, until at last she managed to run through the gateway into the middle of the road. And just at that moment, the very first light of dawn was breaking in the east. She whirled back, but there was no horse or rider behind her now. There was nothing there but an empty graveyard. The shock was too much for the girl. She fell on the ground in a faint. Men coming to work the next day found her, and they picked her up and carried her away to the home of a couple who took care of her till she felt like herself again. When she tried to tell the people of the village about her dead sweetheart, about the tartan shawl, they thought the girl had lost her mind. But one man was more curious than any of the others, and he went back to the graveyard. He began to look among the rows of tombstones, and on the top of one grave, he saw a triangular-shaped patch of tartan cloth. He bent to pick it up, but it wouldn't come free. He pulled, and still it would not come loose. And so he went away and got his friends. They came and brought their picks and their shovels, and they began to dig. They dug all the way to the top of the coffin, and still the shawl would not come free. So they sent for the priest so that he would give them permission to open the coffin. And when he did, they could see clearly why the shawl had not come free, for the end of it was still fastened tightly in the long, bony fingers of he who had once been the girl's sweetheart. It was pried loose and brought back to the girl so that she could take it home with her as a remembrance. And after that, although she thought of Jamie many times, she never cried about his death again, because she was afraid if she did, he might come once more and carry her away with him.